Welcome to the CHCH Newsmakers Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Zamperin. If it's making news in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara, across Canada or around the world, rest assured I will tackle it right here on Newsmakers. You can't watch TV, turn on the radio, read a newspaper without seeing the word tariffs. U.S. President Donald Trump has not only called it the most beautiful word in the dictionary, he's used them to try and restore the American economy to its manufacturing glory years. And one thing is for certain, Trump's tariffs have turned the global economy on its head. Joining me on Newsmakers to discuss American tariffs and their impact on Canadian businesses is Ryan Mallough, the Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Never a dull moment these days in the news.
Not at all. So let's talk about the first and greatest question that I think Canadian businesses have from coast to coast, and that is, how are businesses coping? What can you tell us?
It's been extremely challenging. It's been a very up and down 6 or 7 months now. New information seems to be dropping every day. It seems to change on a whim or on a tweet or on a Truth Social post. Very often, it's made it very difficult to keep up and incredibly difficult to plan. A lot of business owners telling us they really don't know what the next 3-4 months are going to look like, let alone the next year or two.
Which sectors of the Canadian economy, and we're talking small business here, are most vulnerable or have been most susceptible to the impacts of these American tariffs?
So we see it on both sides of the border, and it kind of depends how the business operates. When it comes to the U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods, you see it a lot more in manufacturing, especially auto manufacturing, steel, aluminum, those areas that are either outside of the trade agreement or have the special tariffs on them that the U.S. has applied. However, Canada's counter tariffs actually affect a much broader range of businesses, especially retailers. Anyone that's bringing in goods from the U.S. Is taking a much larger hit and is really feeling the impact on that side from the money that Canada is collecting on the counter tariffs.
And is the impact simply a lack of revenue, a lack of generating a profit at the end of the day?
So it is a lack of revenue, but it's also, there's a lot of compliance that is coming in. There's trying to figure out what tariffs apply to, how to pay them, where your relationship with your suppliers. So ultimately, yeah, there is a hit to revenue, but there's also just a major hit to operations where business owners are having to very quickly become tariff and trade experts where they previously weren't.
When it comes to the competitiveness of these small businesses, either against each other or against others in other provinces or other countries, what are you hearing from CFIB members from that competitive standpoint?
So it's certainly a challenge, and we're hearing that there's a lot of pivoting that has had to happen. I think one of the bright spots that has come out of this whole mess is that there's been a much brighter spotlight on Canada's economy. I think that took a bit of a back seat over the last few years, but I think we're seeing things like internal trade, for example, take much more of a spotlight. The main action that our members are taking as a result of the tariffs is pivoting in their supply chain, and a lot of them are looking within Canada to do that. So the ones that have been able to do that and be able to do it quickly have seen a bit of an uptick on the competitive side. That being said, though, not all supply chains are easily movable. We've heard from some business owners that, it's not impossible, but it's like turning around a cruise ship. It's very, very slow. And so they've taken a hit on that side. How long is this going to go? How long will it last? I think that's what's really up in the air right now and makes it sort of difficult to say where businesses will be again in 6 months, let alone a year from now.
Yeah, and I'm sure that is the question that most business owners have is, how much longer is this going to go on for until a renegotiated North American Free Trade Agreement, or CUSMA in nowadays case, is going to take? And I'm sure you're hearing from business owners who are saying, I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on to my business for.
Yeah, we're actually surveying on that right now, and some of the preliminary results are looking interesting. There's a big chunk of business owners that are telling us that, if this goes for, more than another year, that their operations are in jeopardy. And that's really been the whole story of the trade war, has been uncertainty. We track small business confidence. We do it every month. We've been doing it since the early 90s. And we saw in the aftermath of 9/11, in the aftermath of the '08 financial crisis, at the peak of COVID, right there at the beginning in March 2020, we never saw confidence numbers bottom out the way that they bottomed out during the trade war. And a lot of that has to do with the belief that even during the pandemic, people thought things were going to get better a year from now. People thought that, we're going to have to weather this, but a year from now, we'll be back open, we'll be back to normal, the economy will have recovered, and we'll be in a better spot. The level of uncertainty right now and the feeling that this is sort of going to go as long as the president is very much there. And we are seeing that in small business optimism levels, and we're certainly seeing that in confidence as well.
Ryan Mallough is the VP of Legislative Affairs with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, joining us here on CHCH Newsmakers. You talked about surveying CFIB members going forward. You held a survey as well in July. What did you find and what did you learn from CFIB members?
So that the tariffs continue to have a significant impact. We've seen 73% of our membership take some kind of action in response to the trade war. The most popular one, unfortunately, for Canadian consumers is they're raising their prices of their products and their services as they pass on those tariff costs. Not every business can absorb it. Some are, and that's a hit to the bottom line as well. But on perhaps the brighter side, we're also seeing about 40% of them shift to domestic suppliers and markets. And that's where our work on internal trade has become a major focus on our side, making sure that, if the US market is not as open as it's been, that at least the Canadian market is as open as it should be. And I think people would be surprised after, over 150 years of being a country, it's pretty hard to ship goods across Canada, pretty hard to move people across Canada, much harder than it should be. So again, there have been some bright spots that are coming through in the data, but the overall message remains that as long as tariffs are here, as long as that uncertainty remains, that things are going to continue to be very challenging for small businesses.
I want to talk about cross-border trade involving those small businesses in this country, and how do these American tariffs influence those supply chains?
So I think that it's forced a lot of small business owners to look at their supply chains and see if they can pivot into other areas that aren't taking a tariff hit. At the same time, when it comes to selling, I think it is encouraging businesses to look at new markets. The U.S. free trade agreement, of course, gets a lot of airtime and a lot of attention, as it should. The U.S. has been our largest trade partner virtually forever. Canada has, I think it's over 25 free trade agreements with other jurisdictions across the world, including the EU. And I think that we're seeing a lot of businesses look into new markets where they weren't previously looking, both at home and abroad, as a way to make up for some of that hit that they're taking in lack of accessibility in the U.S. market.
For those Canadian businesses, and again, we're talking small businesses in Canada, for those that are importing raw materials and the like from the U.S. and they have to pay these tariffs, how are they, trying to stay afloat?
So I think right now that they're doing the best that they can. I think we did see, as the tariffs were initially being announced back in the spring and then sort of rolled back, and then, we've seen deadlines shift and move. I think we saw a lot of businesses stockpile during that time. I think that's something that we saw at both sides of the border. A lot of businesses tried to get orders in before the tariffs hit to make sure that they had their goods there. And because of that, we haven't really seen the full brunt again, I think in Canada or the U.S., of the tariffs really hit yet, because there is some stockpiled material that has not been gone through just yet. At the same time, though, we also know from our own data and what we're hearing from our members that that's running out. That this is going to hit at some point. And we know that from some folks in the aluminum and steel industry, that because of the way that our relationship with the states has always worked, there is a lot of back and forth on the border. It's not just importing the raw material, making a good, and then selling it back. Sometimes that material crosses the border multiple times, even within the same business, and they're taking a tariff hit when that's happening multiple times. So it's created some let's call it interesting challenges for a lot of businesses. But the reality is that we are seeing a lot of businesses look to streamline operations, maybe limit the number of products that they are making or selling, and doing everything they can to try to adjust to mitigate that tariff hit when they're facing it.
Focusing on Canadian exporters, and when it comes to their profit margins, it's great that some of these companies are still in the black, but for how much longer? Are you hearing from those exporters who are maybe thinking we have to change how we do business?
Yeah, so that's just it. And again, a sizable chunk of them, it looks like we're, looking at about a year mark seems to be where they're comfortable saying we think we can survive up to that point. If it goes longer than that, though, the picture gets a lot hazier. I think we're seeing, too, so far, a lot of exporters in their relationships with their clients in the U.S. are absorbing a lot of that cost right now. I think more than we might have guessed from the outset. Not sure how tenable that will be going forward as well. Again, I think that's probably a short-term option where the business is trying to mitigate some of the impact, keep those client relationships, keep the supply chain going in hopes that we do reach a deal and get rid of the tariffs. But again, the longer this persists, the more challenging it's going to be to maintain that. And eventually businesses are going to have to pass the cost on, whether it's to their client or ultimately to consumers.
When it comes to the impact the tariffs are having on these businesses, are larger corporations more insulated from the fluctuations of these tariffs than smaller businesses?
I think it really depends on what the corporation is doing. Like, I think we saw all of the major North American car companies came out and said, they've taken very sizable, we're talking, in the $1 billion range, hit from tariffs so far. I don't think you're going to see a small business show the same hit. However, a lot of large corporations too also are moving stuff across the border that is CUSMA compliant. And I think that that's a number that we're watching really, really closely. I think we've seen I think it was RBC put out a number as high as suggesting that 94% of the goods crossing the border are CUSMA compliant. The challenge, though, is when you're looking at the goods, you're not looking at the business. Big businesses do high volume, so that number is going to be high where they are compliant. A lot of small businesses are not CUSMA compliant. I think our most recent survey, we're looking at again, but I think our most recent survey in the spring suggested that it was in the 60% range which implies that 40% are not, and are thus taking the tariff hit. Because before this, there was a small hit to that. I think it was about 2%, but not the 35 that we're seeing now. So I think that it's hitting businesses differently. I think when you look at the overall number, big businesses are taking a sizable hit, especially the auto industry. But a lot of small businesses, in terms of the compliance costs and the ability to move things across the border to get goods or to sell goods, has been severely limited. And I think the hit might mean more to a small business when you're looking at, if they've only got one or two clients and they're cross border, you lose one of them, that's a major hit to the business.
We're talking about U.S. tariffs and their impact on Canadian business with Ryan Mallough, the Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And when it comes to, the different strategies that Canadian businesses are employing to kind of, sidestep some of these impacts, whether it comes to, raising prices, reducing staff, diversifying their market, is there one common denominator amongst those that most businesses are turning to?
So not really on the most side. I think we're seeing a variety of actions taken. In our most recent survey, the plurality, about 40% of businesses suggested that they are raising their prices. We've seen about 36% shift to domestic suppliers and markets. Another 28% have delayed or canceled their expansion plans. I think what we're seeing there is that businesses are trying a lot of different things. That's what I'm taking away from the data. Again, that comes back to some of the uncertainty. You're not really sure if you want to go all the way down a road because this could be gone tomorrow. It could also last the entirety of the Trump presidency, which, as some colleagues remind me, is still another 3.5 years. It's been a very brief amount of time at this point for all the uncertainty and action that has been going on. So I think right now there's no silver bullet solution to this. That's really what we're seeing. But what we are seeing is that 73% of our members have taken some kind of action. And that tells you that, businesses are looking, they're trying to find something that works.
What kind of permanent damage do you think this whole situation is creating for Canadian businesses who might now realize, America's not our market anymore? You mentioned the UK earlier and how Canadian businesses are diversifying where they're sending their goods, and obviously that is a great outlet. Is that kind of play going to be enacted by more and more businesses going forward because they simply can't trust what is happening down south?
I think so. We're seeing that sentiment really shine through when we're surveying our members. That I think that the real damage here has been to the relationship, and I don't think that's going to be a short-term piece. We know, for example, that Canadian counter tariffs impact our membership much more than the U.S. tariffs do, just because we have much more importers than we do exporters. At the same time, 63% of our membership are still out in support of those counter tariffs, even though they know it hurts. And I think that, we see it in sports all the time. It happened recently at the Four Nations. It becomes more than just a game, in particular with the U.S., right? We like beating the U.S. We like making sure that we always show up, that we show our best. And I think that we're seeing that sentiment in our economy as well. I think, when we saw the Buy Canadian movement from consumers and a lot of businesses taking advantage of that as well, that I think a lot of people thought it would be short-lived. I think I certainly thought that it would be short-lived. And here we are 6-7 months into it, and it still feels like it's pretty solidly there. You still, see people at the grocery store checking where the products came from, and you see people put down products that have come in from the U.S. And I think that's the kind of thing that's going to be sticky in people's memories. And on the small business side, as we diversify markets, we see it in other things. When Canada Post goes on strike, a lot of businesses don't come back after the strike is resolved. They've found something new. And I think we're going to see that come through in this, whatever the outcome is as well.
I thought the whole Buy Canadian thing was going to be short-lived as well. And I'm not sure what my time frame was for short-lived. Certainly not this long. And I think the thinking was, it's just one of those things that it'll kind of go by the wayside and we'll just kind of move on. But I think Canadians are deeply hurt, and Canadian business owners are deeply hurt by what's gone on.
I think so too. I think that, this has tapped into the national pride a little bit. And we're even seeing that in government policies, when we have Council of Federation meetings, when the premiers all get together, when the prime minister joins them, those meetings have kind of a set cadence and tone. You sort of are expecting the outcomes. It's a lot of talk. There's always a little bit of contentiousness that is there. I think we've seen a lot more unity on that side. I think, oftentimes people will point to our friends in Quebec as being somewhat challenging. Quebec has a pretty robust mutual recognition legislation on the table right now to help along the internal trade file that is as good as any of the other provinces that have done it on that side. I think that, it's a shame that it took this to do it. But I think, the Prime Minister's talk about one Canadian economy is reflective of how Canadians are feeling. And I think it has tapped into a patriotism and pride that we haven't seen in a while really shine through across the country. And we're seeing that with business owners as well.
When it comes to the federal government, and then we'll get to the provinces, but from the federal government standpoint, aside from the counter tariffs on American goods, what has the government done that the CFIB has said, okay, that's a check mark?
So I think the big one is the federal government's internal trade piece. It's largely a province-to-province issue, but there is some play for the federal government to do. They introduced a mutual recognition agreement, which means that they will recognize provincial legislation and rules as compliant with federal ones. Right now, there's a lot of conflict between jurisdictions. So we're trying to streamline that out. The federal government's been a good leader in that space. On the counter tariff side, though, that's where we're still really looking for a little bit more action. We know that the government has collected a significant sum of money. We want to see that money coming back to impacted businesses, including the small businesses. We've seen help for, the large automakers, the big steel plants. That's all necessary. But we want to see help for the small businesses that have been impacted too, because they too are taking a hit. And this does bleed through the entire economy. It's not just the importer or exporter that's taking the hit. It is the restaurant chain or the supplier that's up the chain that relies on their business, their customers, the jobs being created there to thrive as well. So federal government, again, I think the messaging has been solid. Internal trade has been good. Still some more work to do on action to be taken to help boost the economy, though.
COVID-19 pandemic introduced us to the CERB. Are you suggesting the government implement some kind of CERB-like payment, some kind of relief for small businesses?
So I think we're looking for some kind of relief, certainly. I think the carbon tax rebate might be a good model for that, just a straight check based on the business's loss or their size or whatever that looks like. But we want to see some sort of action. Another thing that we've suggested is that, at least on a temporary basis, you could reduce the small business tax rate so that the money businesses are making can be reinvested back into employees, back into training, expanding operations, perhaps pursuing new markets, something like that. But something needs to be done with that money to give the economy a bit of a jolt. Right now, we know it's absolutely being collected. We've got members that are paying into it, but it hasn't been given back yet. So that's some action that we're looking to see when the House resumes in September.
From a provincial government standpoint, I guess we'll focus on Ontario, seeing that's where CHCH is and a lot of the businesses that will probably tune into this podcast are. What have you liked from what Premier Doug Ford has done?
So again, I think the Premier has been excellent in his leadership of the Council of Federation. Ontario is helping to get the internal trade piece moving. I think they've signed memoranda of understanding with every province except for Quebec and Newfoundland now. So certainly a lot of good momentum on that side. The Premier has also announced, we're still waiting on a timeline, but there was a workers' compensation, it's the WSIB in Ontario, a rebate that was issued earlier this year. As part of the tariff response plan, they will issue a second rebate of equivalent value later this year. That is significant money back in small business owners' pockets. Again, waiting for details on the timeline on that side, but that will be positive. And then I believe just recently there was I think it's $1 billion fund that was announced that is a step in the right direction. It's not going to apply to as many small businesses as we would like. It's more for the medium to large guys, but it's in the right area, and we hope to see that expanded as well when Ontario comes back to their legislature in the fall.
Do you think these tariffs have encouraged or enticed small businesses to innovate at an accelerated level?
I think so. I think anytime that you see any sort of pressure come down on business operations and certainly come down on the bottom line, that businesses are going to look to innovate. They're going to look to streamline. They're going to look for new ways of doing business. I think it's still very early. As much as this has felt like it's been forever, it's only been, I think, 6-7 months at this point. So I don't think we've seen the full return on what that looks like yet. But I will certainly say, like, we are seeing an uptick in interest in AI, for example, which up to this point had really been, more larger companies that were looking to use that. I think we're seeing more small businesses wondering, how can we adopt that to expand our operations? Again, I think you're seeing more businesses look at the other free trade agreements that we have and looking in new markets, which is another way of innovating as well. So again, there are some silver linings to the clouds, but ultimately, we need to get a trade deal done with the U.S. We need the free trade agreement back fully intact and operating so that we can get back to business as usual.
Do you have any inside info in terms of when this could potentially get reworked?
Boy, I wish I did. I really hope it's soon. Yeah. It's interesting. Going into this year, we didn't have tariffs on our bingo card or on our planning, but we did have CUSMA. The free trade agreement was actually up for review in 2026. We'd already started some preliminary work just to see, what's working in the agreement, what should be looked at. I have a hunch that that's going to be pretty accelerated now. It feels that this whole tariff battle is ultimately leading to some sort of, if it's renegotiated or revamped Canada, Mexico, U.S. free trade agreement. So I think that we'll probably see, if we were expecting those talks to start in early 2026, I would expect, probably mid-fall things really ramp up on that side. Where it goes from there, though, again, like with all things in this trade battle, incredibly hard to say. It's just a lot of uncertainty in terms of where the president wants to go.
Have you heard whether there's an industrial or commercial sector that might be revamped or might be impacted by a revamped CUSMA?
It's hard to say. I mean, we know that there's been a ton of focus on the auto industry. It's, of course, a major industry in Canada and an industry that is very fully integrated between the two countries. I think that's one that's going to get a lot of attention on that side. And then I would look at the other sectors that have seen those sector-specific tariffs. We know steel, we know aluminum, copper just got hit. Pharmaceuticals has gotten a lot of conversation. I think we're expecting something there, as well as computer chips and semiconductors. But I think at this point, looking at it, it's going to be one of those everything is on the table kind of things. That seems to be how the president negotiates. So again, we've always been of the impression that no deal is better than a bad deal. We want the best outcome for Canada, and expect, everyone from the premiers, the prime minister, small businesses, big businesses across the country will be fully on board to get the best deal we can.
I know these trade deals don't happen overnight, obviously, but are you a little bit surprised or maybe dismayed or feeling somewhere in between in terms of, the federal government's ability to iron out trade deals with other countries or other continents or other, entities around the globe?
I mean, I think right now Canada's in a better position than most countries because of the trade deal that we had in place, right? That CUSMA is still largely intact or mostly intact, puts us at a bit of a competitive advantage, and I think gives the government a little bit of leeway to play a little bit more hardball than some of the other countries are playing. I think the other thing that's at play that, again, is one of those ever-changing pieces is the trade deals that the U.S. seems to be reaching with every other country seem to not be deals 2 weeks later. I mean, we saw, Japan and the EU look done, and now they're maybe not done, and everyone's kind of disputing what the details are. I think India was announced as finished, and then suddenly there was a 50% tariff that were levied on them. So I think that there's a lot that is still up in the air. I think right now, Canada remains in a good position to get a deal done. But the longer it goes, the more critical it will be to get a deal done. And again, small business owners, more than anything right now, are looking for certainty, and we need to ensure that we are providing it. If we can provide it with a trade deal, fantastic. But as we are doing that, there are other places, reducing taxes, cutting through red tape, providing a little bit more economic certainty on those areas we can control on this side of the border that we're going to look for governments to focus on.
When it comes to long-term growth prospects for Canadian independent businesses, obviously they're looking, the most successful businesses will look at the long game, but certainly they are struggling. Are they calling out for help? How does that back and forth happen with a group like the CFIB and independent business?
So we, of course, are serving our membership very, very regularly, making sure that we have not only our finger on the pulse of how things are feeling on the ground, what they're experiencing, but also what they're looking for when it comes to things like government support. Again, as I noted earlier, I think we've seen a very positive spotlight on the Canadian economy, at least in the rhetoric that we're hearing from premiers, from the Prime Minister, opposition parties as well. That's all well and good. We do need to see action taken now. And the number one thing, bar none, that our members want to see is, as a response to the trade war, as a general response to boosting the Canadian economy, is tax reduction. Right now, the federal small business tax rate is 9%. If you're a small business owner in Ontario, you have the highest provincial rate in the country at 3.2%. We're looking to both governments to reduce those numbers. Ultimately, we'd love to see 0% on the small business tax side. We've got that in Manitoba and I believe the Yukon as well, so we know that it is doable. But we've seen other governments take action on that side already. Prince Edward Island increased their threshold for the small business tax deduction and reduced their rate this year. Nova Scotia reduced their rate recently as well. So the more that we can ensure that the money businesses make is able to go back into that business, is reinvested in attracting and retaining employees, in improving training, in buying new equipment, in expanding operations, the better the economy is going to be. So from a long-term perspective, that's really what we're looking for. And those are the conversations that we're having with politicians across the country to make sure that they understand the importance of tax reduction to small businesses.
After winning the federal election in April, Prime Minister Mark Carney and his government did not introduce a budget in the spring. They're certainly going to do so in the fall. Are you in the government's ear to say, hey, this has to be in place?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is the top ask that is coming in our pre-budget submission. I think those were due in August, and now we're setting up our meetings with all parties at the federal level to highlight its importance. But all eyes will be on that. Still waiting on a timeline for when the federal budget's coming out. We know it's been promised by the end of the session. That could be as late as December, although I would guess that it's going to come earlier than that. But it's an important budget. And, the reality, too, is that Canada's finances are not in as a robust place as one would hope. When coming into a crisis, unfortunately, we've just come out of several crises. There was the pandemic. There was also runaway inflation coming off of that, a lot of supply chain crunches coming off of that, that impacted small businesses across the country. But we are looking to the government to support, and that is the top ask, is we want to see a reduction in the small business tax rate for sure to keep more money in small businesses.
When it comes to lessons learned for Canadian businesses, small entrepreneurs, those independent business owners, again, when it comes to lessons learned, what do you think they're going to take away from this whole experience to maybe prevent the pain that they're feeling now from happening when this might arise sometime down the road?
Yeah, I think it comes back to sort of long-term planning and diversification. And that's something, it's true for small businesses. It's true for the economy. I think, looking back on it, I think it would be hard to argue that we probably became a little bit over-reliant on the U.S. And while I don't think anybody believed that the U.S. would go down this road, The reality is that it was always a possibility. It was always something they could do. And, it is a major trading partner. Geographically, they are right there. But I think it has highlighted the importance of diversifying operations. And so I think that, in the longer term, I think we will see a lot of small businesses paying a little bit more attention to where Canada is on trade agreements with other countries. I think we will see a lot of attention paid to the ability to move goods and people within Canada. I think that the internal trade benefits coming off of this are going to be significant and extremely positive for small businesses. And I think too that the economy is going to be the thing. It's not to say that it ever really takes a back seat, and we've got a number of important issues that need addressing in the country. But I think that a lot of Canadians are going to be looking to their government to lead economy first going forward. And I think that means that taxes across the board, but also, government support programs and investment, ability to attract investment are all going to get much more of a spotlight and a highlight than they have over the last few years. And again, ultimately, I think that's positive.
Ryan, really appreciate the time. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and best of luck in getting Canadian businesses to a place where they're not feeling as much or maybe zero pain down the road. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for checking out the Newsmakers podcast. And a big thank you to the All-Star cast behind the scenes. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment as well. You can catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.